Adam had taken to the streets due to a rising restlessness. He had been rounding a corner when the horrible frequency sounded in his ear. The near-blinding ringing caught him off guard, and his bike struck the curb with enough force to cripple the front wheel. Before dismounting his motorcycle, Adam scrambled to get the comm out of his ear. He had been ignoring it, turning out the chatter in a sort of attempt to give Kathy some privacy on our date. Hearing Marco's voice come snaking through the speaker set his teeth on edge. Adam looked at his watch. Kathy was still a few miles away, and seemed to be on the move. Where was she going? The little blinking dot on his map was heading north, but it didn't line up with any known roads. "Kathy," Adam said urgently into the comm. "If you can hear me, tell me where you are." Kathy's ears were still ringing as Marco led her deeper into the house. His grip was tight on her arm, undoubtedly because he expected resistance. She didn't provide much, however. Her head was spinning, but her curiosity was piqued, as was her determination to find out every detail of the sculptor's plans. "Sorry to end things so abruptly, Kathy, but plans change," Marco said as he hurried them down a long hallway.
"Care to explain?"
Kathy retorted, fighting dizziness. She hoped Adam was listening, and he had ignored her protest for privacy. Marco opened the door and thrust her inside, letting go of her arm only long enough to turn on a light. "You just couldn't leave the hat alone, could you?" Kathy was almost concerned the frequency had messed with her brain, as she was pushed and prodded along what looked like an old mining tunnel. An eerie mist clung to the walls and ceiling.
"Tell me, Marco,"
she quipped, unable to help herself.
"For your role as the Rat King, were you typecast?"
Marco scoffed. "I guess I deserve that."
"Yep."
"You weren't always part of the plan, Kathy," he explained, going back to the original question and brushing off the jab. "I was after the mayor at the start. I figured the easiest way to get to him was through his son. But Richard and I couldn't quite hit it off the way I'd hoped."
"He raved about you,"
Kathy protested, sticking up for her friend. Richie had a hard enough time making real friends who weren't trying to use him for some sort of advancement. It made her blood boil to learn that his scumbag had joined the ranks. "Yes, well, I could barely stand him. But then you came into the picture." He stopped walking and had her face him. "You, with your pretty smile and your charming wit." They began walking again as Marco continued. "Richard's puppy dog crush was immediately obvious, as was the fact that you didn't share the sentiment." Guilt flared up in Kathy's heart as she understood her part in the scheme. "I deigned to think that if I could get the guy jealous enough, he'd seek me out one-on-one. All I needed was to be alone with him long enough to inject him with the serum. I didn't count on him not being the jealous type, just like I didn't count on your company being so enjoyable." Ignoring the last comment, Kathy seized the opportunity to ask about the serum.
"Serum?"
"Remember what I told you about the frogs?" Marco was being surprisingly forthcoming. "I was able, with some help of course, to construct my own version of a cryoprotectant compound." Kathy's eyes widened with hope.
"So you mean all those people are still alive?"
"Not all of them. There were setbacks. Humans are much more complex," he explained. "As with all science, my ice sculptures were a series of trial and error."
"But the goal was to keep them alive?"
"Of course it was." Marco was very matter-of-fact. "I wanted hostages. I'm not some kind of sicko. But without the serum, all I ever got was corpses, and they didn't do anybody any good." A silence settled between them as they walked on through the poorly lit path. Kathy took note that they were in not just one tunnel, but a series. She made a conscious effort to log each turn into memory. "Kathy!" She looked at her captor. Marco was quiet and focused on the journey. "Kathy, can you hear me? Where is he taking you?" It was Adam. Relief coursed through her as she realized the ringing in her ears had lessened enough for her to hear the whisper-like voice of her partner. Her calm must have been damaged by the frequency, but at least she knew it was working.
Where exactly are we going?
She asked without caring about bluntness.
The epicenter.
Marco's answer was cryptic.
The what?
Marco's expression was unreadable as he turned back to look at her.
Don't tell me he's confused,
he mocked.
If he hasn't figured out where all this began, it might be time to find yourself a new hero.
Where it all began?
Where it all began.
Kathy fought to remember everything Night Shadow had told her about the frozen victims. Everything she and Adam had helped to uncover. Her mind raced back to the warehouses, then to the homeless men who had dotted the streets in their icy coffins. They were encircling something. She strained to remember, but the ringing in her ears was hindering her focus.
The old library.
Adam's voice. Of course.
The library?
Kathy repeated, hoping Marco would confirm it. Marco's grin widened, and his head gave a nod.
We're almost there.
So, the old library did have a purpose in all this. Her ex had been a key player in preserving the building. He had to have a connection to the sculptor. But what? Adam didn't have time for contemplation. By his map on the watch face, the library was roughly 4 miles north of his current location. With his motorcycle out of commission, he was left with only one option. He had to run.
Keep him talking, Kathy,
he said as he stowed his bike in an alley and tossed his helmet onto the ground beside it.
I'm on my way.
Adam broke out into a near-Olympic pace as he ran full throttle in the library's direction.
This won't work,
he thought, knowing it would take him at least half an hour to reach his target, and who knows how long it would take to find Kathy once he got there, not to mention how tired he would be. He had to make up time, increase his speed, and at the very least conserve his stamina. His eyes darted about frantically, almost pleading with the city to give him another means of transportation. A few Harleys caught his attention, parked outside a cafe. They were inviting, but Adam knew it would take too much time and explanation to convince any of the riders to part with their bike. He ran on, faster than he knew he could. It must have been adrenaline, something inside him, driving him to keep going. After about 2 miles, he stopped at a crosswalk. The light was red, and he knew he needed a moment to rest his lungs. Closing his eyes, he breathed deeply and prayed for a solution.
An insurance policy?
Kathy repeated. Adam wanted her to keep the enemy talking. She was usually good at that, but she was finding it increasingly hard to focus.
Yes,
Marco answered absently.
If my, what's a good word, benefactor ever found reason to use my ice against me, I wanted to be sure of survival.
You don't trust him?
Did you not notice how he decorates?
Marco scoffed.
The man's a perfectionist. One little mistake could be my end, and I'm not willing to chance it.
So that wasn't his house,
Kathy thought, almost relieved that she hadn't been completely duped by the man beside her.
Why work for someone you don't trust?
She pressed him further.
If the money spins, the bank is inconsequential.
Kathy stopped walking.
That's all this is to you? A paycheck?
Marco tugged her forward.
Come on.
You killed all those people for money?
Kathy wasn't budging. She'd had enough of this pretentious creep. Marco's demeanor turned cold.
No,
he said, once again facing her.
I killed those people for science.
He leaned in closer so that his face was centimeters from hers.
It's the blue shadow that I'll kill for the money.
Thwack. Almost like a reflex, Kathy's fist collided with Marco's face. The impact was unexpected, and enough to knock the sculptor back a few steps. His hold on her loosened, and she was just able to pry her arm free before everything went dark around her. "Hey, mister, you look like you could use a ride." The voice rang out of the cold night as if it was heaven sent. Adam spun around and found himself looking at a horse-drawn carriage. It was one of the ones that always took tourists around the city. The white stallion huffed, its breath turning to mist in the frigid winter night. Adam smiled. He didn't need a romantic moonlit ride, but he could use a horse. He looked up at the jovial bearded cabbie who stared back at him with a twinkle in his eyes.
"Something happened to your bike, son?"
he asked with a light-hearted tone.
"Or do you just like running around in riding leathers?"
Adam smiled. He'd have thought his masked face would be off-putting, but the man didn't seem to mind.
"That's a long story,"
Adam said.
"How much does a ride cost?"
"A 20-minute tour's about $15, the cabbie stated.
"And how many do you do a day, sir? Maybe 30?
The cabbie chuckled.
"Oh, no. Old Prancer here would get too tired if we did that many. This carriage gets pretty heavy by the end of the night."
He reached down and patted his horse.
"Well, how about we give him a break?"
Adam suggested.
"Yeah, I could use a ride, but I think the carriage is too bulky."
"What do you mean?" The driver looked confused. Adam gave the gentleman his most reassuring look.
"I mean, I'll give you $2,000 if you let me borrow your horse for the night. I promise I'll have him back in the stable by morning."
The cabbie whistled.
"Oh, boy. You've got a lady to impress, I take it." "You could say that."
Kathy's head was pounding. She opened her eyes slowly and blinked with uncertainty in the brightly lit room. They were in the library now. But how?
"You need to conserve your energy,"
Marco said as he approached from the other side of the room. Realizing she was sitting, Kathy quickly got to her feet. She was immediately greeted with a dizzying head rush. Her knees threatened to collapse, but Marco steadied her.
"All right, take it easy,"
he said like someone attempting to calm a spooked animal.
"What did you do?"
Kathy's voice was weak as she caught her breath. Marco just looked at her for a moment.
"I haven't done anything,"
he answered finally.
"Your body is slowing down, adjusting to the cryoagents from the fog. It takes time."
"The fog?"
"I've pumped it all through these tunnels."
You were breathing it too,"
she thought aloud.
"You're not even tired."
"Over the past several months, my cells have completely harmonized with the cryoformula."
He smiled.
"I can barely even feel the cold anymore."
Can you feel anything?"
"I admit, your stamina surprised me,"
Marco conceded, and took a step back so that she could clearly see the bruising that was beginning to form beneath his eye.
"So what's your endgame, Sculptor?"
Kathy formed the name with audible disdain.
"Because killing me just to have the Blue Shadow arrive and beat the tar out of you sounds like a really terrible idea."
Marco smirked and helped her stand properly instead of leaning against the wall like her rapidly exhausting muscles wanted.
"Let me show you,"
he said as he led her slowly and casually around the room. Kathy knew it was the old library, but the room they were occupying looked more like a sterile medical facility, minus all the medical equipment. In fact, the room was nearly empty except for a chair, a small writing desk, and a few books, both scientific and fiction. The bright white walls made Kathy feel a mix of claustrophobia and dizziness. Marco informed her that they were in what he called
the cold room. "Not very original,"
he admitted.
"but this is where the magic happens."
Kathy felt her legs losing strength, and as much as she hated to, held on tighter to Marco for support. The simple act seemed to boost the villain's confidence, because his voice filled with arrogance, and he grew more and more cocky with each new remark.
"You see, the cold room is where the sculptor finishes his creations. After injecting each poor victim with the cryoserum, I will place them in here and flood the room with a mixture of water vapors and other elements."
Kathy's tired brain could barely understand the chemistry, but Marco took the time to stress that
highly oxygenated ice crystals are key to the hostage's survival. I am particularly fond of the near microscopic flecks of silver I added to give the statues that added sparkle.
She tried to keep her eyes focused.
It makes them more eye-catching,
he said loftily.
I want people to stop and marvel when they see my masterpieces.
A few minutes of Marco pointing out different piping apparatuses and explaining that he liked to start the freezing process while his subjects were still conscious, in order to best achieve his coveted true-to-life effect, felt like hours for Kathy. Ice crystals had already begun forming on her clothes and hands. Her breathing had slowed and her body begged for sleep. She willed herself to stay focused, to stay awake. Sensing her weakening state, Marco gently draped her arm around his shoulders and half carried her to his final point of interest.
You see this thermostat?
He said, like an overpaid museum tour guide.
This, Kathy, is what starts off the whole process. See, the trick is to freeze things slowly. Drop the temperature a few degrees at a time, as I'm doing now.
Kathy just stared at him.
So all I have to do is up the thermostat and I'm golden?
Marco chuckled softly.
Remember what I said about insurance? I've installed a biological security system, which means if anybody other than myself touches this baby, the whole room freezes in an instant. And we wouldn't want that, would we?
He looked at her for a moment before taking a lock of her hair in his hand. Gently toying with the curl, he watched as tiny ice crystals formed and floated away with each movement. Adam's cheeks burned against the cold wind as he guided his horse through the city. His cowl was on, and he was ready to go. If he left some news reporter wondering why the Blue Shadow needed a thoroughbred, so be it. He needed to get to the library, and soon.
I'm nearly there, Kathy,
he said.
Keep him talking for as long as you can.
Kathy's brain was in a fog. She didn't know how to respond to all Marco's scientific babble, and hoped he would simply continue monologuing. Adam held tightly to the reins, and coaxed his horse to increase speed. The small bells on the bridle sent a crazed jingling to the crisp night. Kathy looked from Marco to the thermostat.
11 degrees,
she said.
And dropping fast,
Marco added coldly.
Hurry up, hero. She hasn't got much time.
Kathy swallowed hard, partly from fear and partly because an odd pain was growing in her throat. Her small yet audible discomfort caught Marco's attention. The cruelty that had clouded his eyes moments before became partially muted.
I know it hurts,
he said.
But fighting it is only going to make it worse.
He helped her lean against the wall.
Aren't you tired of fighting, Kathy?
Despite her efforts, the fear, pain, and anger Kathy had welled up inside her, manifested into a single tear, and it froze as it trailed down her face. Marco brushed the icy drop from her cheek.
You can rest now. Just embrace it.
The slight sound of jingle bells brought the sculptor back to his plot. He left Kathy by the wall and began pacing around the room, checking his instruments and keeping an eye on the door. Determined to stay awake, Kathy scanned the room for anything that might help Adam in the fight against the sculptor. Her eyes wandered drunkenly over the various instruments and vessels that contained the freezing agents he had wheeled in, when, just now, finally her gaze fell onto the writing desk. A flash of recollection filled her thoughts. She recognized one of the political books. It was written by Hrax. Her foggy mind recalled the card she'd received from him, the one she refused to open.
The card,
she said slowly.
What?
Adam asked, as he and his steed ascended the steps of the old library.
The one from Mayhem. I know you kept it.
Yeah,
I want you to read it.
The ice crystals forming in her throat made speaking difficult, but she pushed on.
Maybe you were right. Maybe there's a clue.
Kathy?
I think he's working with Marco.
She paused to breathe. You can read it yourself, Adam said to keep her talking. He dismounted the horse and quickly made his way through the hallways.
I can't. It's getting colder.
You'll be all right. I'm here. Adam burst through the door. The sound of footsteps gave Kathy a much-needed surge of hope. Marco heard them too, and a flash of silver caught her attention. A gun. The coward. She wanted desperately to save her friend. She tried to call out to him, but the ice patches in her throat were now too numerous. There was only one option. She looked to the thermostat, and with a prayer and the last of her strength, Kathy slammed her hand against the keypad. Within seconds, the entire room transformed into a solid block of ice, just as Marco had warned. Blue rounded the corner and stood in stunned amazement as he faced a bullet flash frozen only inches from his heart.